Welcome. In this video, we're going to take a look at adding in the deformers for our remaining art layers on this leg so that we can get this leg pretty much done so we can be working on creating a cloned group that we'll be able to use for the opposite leg. So when we have artwork that is relatively symmetrical, it's nice to be able to use cloning as a way to orient that. So what we want to do is add in the deformers. So we'll end up having our deformers going across the line there while we're keeping our artwork nice and organized. So first thing I'm going to do is move this over a little bit so we can see what's going on. And we need to be selecting the art layer. So we're selecting an art layer, we're not selecting the peg to add in the deformer. So there's two ways that we can go about adding in this deformer, and while we do this, I am going to isolate so I can see just this layer. So I've disabled the lower leg because I want to be able to see the full contour. So when we're adding in the deformer, we can work with that. So one way that we can add in a deformer is under the animation window, we have an option for envelope creator. And the envelope creator allows us to create a deformer with the number of points that we specify here. And when we're adding the deformer, what we really want is to have points kind of at the corners as we go into the curve, something in the middle so it's quick and easy to adjust that contour. So the more points you add, the more control you have over it, but the harder it is to animate. So if you have too many points, when you're trying to animate it, you're having to move lots and lots of points to keep it looking smooth and aesthetic. But if we don't have enough points, we can't create the manipulations that we're looking for. So 4 points would be the absolute minimum that we would add in. 6 points or 8 points is probably going to be a preferred option with that. So if I click on create envelope, we can see it gave me these 4 points. And then once I have those points, while I have my transform tool active, I can manipulate the shape of it. So I can see what it's doing. I can already see that it did not put the curve precisely on the perimeter of my artwork here. So I zoom way in and I can see it's kind of in the middle right there. So when we move things around, we aren't necessarily getting the full control of the deformation of that shape. So let's undo that. So if we go up to 6 points on this and create an envelope, we'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have our 6 points. It's pretty close, and I could adjust this and work with it. Undo that. Let's go up to 8. Create the envelope. So 8 points. We have 3. We should have 3 on each side, 1 at each end for quick manipulations. Because I can grab a point and move it versus having to, oh, I need to move this and move that. So that's 2 motions to adjust that shape. Where if I grab the rigging tool so it's not animating and adjust the rig here, or the deformer, if that deformer is at the end here, now when I work with it, we can see how we're able to move it very quickly and easily. So the envelope creator, especially if we don't need super high fidelity, if we have really simple artwork, it can be a great way of doing it. But instead, I'm going to use the rigging tool. When I switch over into the rigging tool, I'm going to want to take a look at the tool properties that we have here. If we don't specify, it's going to just automatically guess at what type of deformation we want to make. And when we're modifying a shape here, and not just kind of more of a line or a blob, where we would use curve mode. So we might use that on a blade of grass, a branch on a tree, a block of hair. So we can adjust it really easily. Sometimes a curve deformer can work well on a foot, but we want to select envelope. So I have to make sure I go in my tool properties and select envelope. And now at this point I can decide I like to start my first point close to, at that top or at that bottom point, not putting it in the middle. Now we drag to our starting point. Now I'm going to try and get it close to the shape while I'm working, but I know I can't get it precisely, and I will modify that afterward. And then once again we draw back, and our two segments or handles should be approximately 2/3 the length of the distance between our 2 points as we're doing this. Now I'll drag back, drag back, drag back, drag back, drag back, and when we get to the end we can see our cursor changes, and if I hold down Alt or Option, it becomes a circle with a C in it, indicating it's now going to close this curve. So if you neglect to choose curve mode and you start drawing a curve deformer, or envelope mode, and you start drawing a curve deformer, you'll get to the end and you'll try and close it, and you'll be like, why isn't it closing? This is driving me nuts. And that's almost always going to be the reason why. So now at this next point, what we want to do is to zoom in and adjust our deformers so that these points and handles are indeed lined up and giving us the shape that we are looking for. Realistically, while you're working with a deformer, your deforms should never try to kind of curve more than 90 degrees. If you're going more than 90 degrees, you really need another handle in there to truly have control over what you are doing with your deformer. So now we can see that we are pretty much right on. And if I click on my transform tool, it kicks me out of rigging mode, and I can quickly test this deformer so I can see how I can very easily start to adjust the shape of this. Now, looking at my model sheet, I can see I don't need a lot of really dramatic bends with this, so we're going to be able to get away with just using these 8 points on it, and that should be sufficient. So that gives me the first deformer, and if we want to hide it, of course we click our hide controls and it goes away. When I have my artwork selected here, and I'm just going to go back into peg selection mode, so when I have my artwork selected, if I want to see the deformer that is with this, then we can click on our button to say show deformer with it, and then that pulls it up. If I have multiple deformers that I want to see, so let's see, we have a deformer on down here as well, so I can click down here. If I click the double deformer, then we'll see both of them. Otherwise, if I click the single one, we only get to see one of the deformers, but if we want to see both of them, then we can see what's there. So again, this is going to give me the controls that I'm looking for. I'm going to disable the other two parts, enable the lower leg so I can see that shape. And once again, this is where we want to go to our rigging tool. You'll remember that we started on envelope mode, and I'm going to click and drag, 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 click and drag. And this leg, I may end up needing an extra point down there to fully control it, and then get to the end and Alt drag to close out what we have done. Zoom in, adjust the positions of these handles, adjust the positions of my points to get the shape that I am looking for and the control that I want. So it is not always going to be nice to you as to how that curve lines up. So when I look here, because again, that's really more than 90 degrees. So if I pull that out here, looks like we can get it pretty close to maintaining following that curve. So I can see that line is really lining up nicely there, lining up nicely here. Let me just adjust those points. All right, happy with that one. You can turn off the rigging tool, and again, this is where you can work with it. So it may be that for controlling that shin and the shape of the calf on this particular leg, we may need 2 more points in here just to have control as we go to our different views with it. But we'll start with it here and see. Oh, I don't want to actually animate it. I was going to just go back to our rigging tool. Turns red. Now I can modify it. Whoa, don't want to add a new point. Back to transform. Turns yellow or green as we're working. So remembering that when we're animating, things turn yellow. When we turn animate off, or when we're rigging, it does red overlays. So then that can be a way of seeing a little bit of what is going on with our shapes. So now we go into the foot, repeat the same process. So with this, click and drag, 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 click and drag. And you'll notice we're getting some pretty wonky things happening here, because we're going to have to convert a few of these to corner points. And I lost track of my line, so I'm going to disable that so I can see the white line occurring out here. And this is now going to be getting me pretty darn close to what I want. So now to create some of these corners, so I get the bend here, we hold down Alt or Option, and now I can drag that point out. So it creates Alt or Option when we drag, creates a corner point so that the 2 handles can work independently of each other, which is what we need on some of these kind of sharp turns. So it still gives us control over it. So now that gives me a pretty accurate path around my shape, though that one is really kind of a foot. So that should hopefully give me all of the parts that I need for that. Click off here. We can see it's there. And when we start putting this deformer onto the other views, as we manipulate this, that's really where we're going to discover if we do need some additional points added into our artwork. And that shouldn't be end of the world option at that point. So we can turn back on our view there. We can see we have our deforms happening here. Now, if you don't like the overlap of the nodes, you can shorten the names, or we can adjust the positions a little bit so we maintain our straight lines. It looks like we probably do want one more deform, and that will be for our knee crease, because it would make sense for that to, we may need to manipulate that. So when we're doing the knee crease here, I'll grab my rigging tool, and with that I am going to put it, let's start out and create a curve point there, create a curve point here, so I could do these with straight points, but I would rather set it up with, instead of using straight points, have the handles for manipulation. So I'm holding down Alt to adjust those angles on this. So now it gives me that control of this. So when we're back here, now if I need to push or adjust this a little bit, we have the ability to do so. So now we have that final deformation set up. I'm going to just now switch over to my node view, and if you hit Control or Command F twice when you're over the node view window where it has the red box and it's active, it makes it go full screen, so then you have just a nicer amount of space to work. So if you don't have a 8,000 inch display that you're working in, that can be a nice way of just simplifying what we have. And because this is now mostly organized in the way that I want it, remember these pegs are sharing the same pivot point location, so we always want to leave those in a vertical alignment so we can tell what's going on when we look at our view. And it just shows me now I want to move that over a little bit there, and that gives me my leg. One more Command or Control F, it brings me back out of full screen and to my standard view. We can activate these two layers. So this leg is pretty much done. And in the next part, we're going to look at how we can utilize this same leg for the other view. And we will see how to do that next. Good luck rigging and have fun.